If you're new to philosophy or to radical theory, the single worst thing that you could possibly do to yourself is to get interested or start reading Continental philosophy and, all those French post-structuralist, postmodern theorists. The absolute worst thing that you could do, that is bottom tier theorizing, avoid it like the plague. So I think that's in the online theory sphere, as well as, offline as well, there's this huge tendency to fetishize people like, just all of the French theorists, starting with Georges Bataille, Gilles Deleuze, Félix Guattari, Jean Baudrillard, Michel Foucault, all of these guys, all in the same tradition. There's such a repugnant, disgusting tendency among their followers to do nothing but to fetishize them. And following in their footsteps, they're like the people who are interested in continental philosophy and who, politically speaking, are interested in, generally they're a bunch of anarchists. They don't tend to be Marxists. They don't tend to identify as communists. They tend to, align themselves with political theorists like the Invisible Committee or, just like insurrectionary anarchists or like all of that sort of thing. Basically anything except a like bona fide materialist, Marxist, communist critique. That is what these people are interested in. They take eclecticism to be a valuable thing. They take it to be, worthwhile in its own right. And there's just such a disgusting tendency to fetishize figures and like buy into this cult of personality, especially around a figure like Gilles Deleuze and Michel Foucault. But, to a lesser extent, all of these guys, like Derrida, just absolutely disgustingly fetishized. All of them. It's a really terrible thing. There is no real substantial engagement with the ideas. And when there is, it like, you don't really get a meaningful critique of their ideas. And, there's a refusal to engage with the communist, orthodox, Marxist critique of anarchism. And, the obvious point that these kinds of anarchist movements have really done nothing for anybody. They have never materialized in any kind of concrete political movement. I had a podcast episode recently. It's called What Is to Be Done, episode 15 of the podcast, where we compared EndNote's critique of the coming insurrection, a book by the Invisible Committee, which is very much in line with what we're talking about here, very much indebted to Deleuze and Guattari and, concepts of biopower, Agamben, all that sort of shit, like very eclectic insurrectionary anarchist shit. They're both, both of these groups call themselves communizers, but they mean very different things by it. But if you compare the impact or even just the predictions of what EndNotes, who are, for better or for worse, they're Marxists, compare EndNotes to the coming insurrection. Both these essays from 10 plus years ago, compare their political programs and compare what has actually transpired over the past decade. If you have eyes to see, if you have ears to hear with, you will know that nothing in the coming insurrection, none of that bullshit has had any meaningful impact on the development of politics over the past decade and the reemergence of the socialist movement for however you want to characterize that. Like it has developed in some sense. It has gained some traction. There's obviously it's still completely disorganized and there's no unity whatsoever, so it's not that great or anything, but it's developed like back when the communist insurrection was coming out. You really couldn't even call yourself a communist, but that's somewhat more acceptable these days. But compare like what these people are talking about, the kinds of political programs that these two different groups are advocating for, and their theorizations of anti-capitalist struggle. And you'll see that endnotes are actually like, they're so fucking obviously like more on the mark than the coming insurrection. Nothing that the coming insurrection has said has had any kind of impact on the development of politics over the past decade. It's completely irrelevant, and they're heavily indebted to the entire tradition. It's a French group. I mean, they're anonymous, but it's a French group coming out of Tikkun, which is a French group. So they're heavily indebted to this whole tradition of post-structuralism, postmodernism, all of these figures that gets just so fetishized, and this entire tradition of philosophy that people don't engage with. So anyway, what I want to say here is if you are new to philosophy, you're absolutely forbidden from reading anything from the 20th century, much less anything French. Do not read any French philosophy except Descartes and Malebranche. That's it. That's the only French philosophy you can read, and you can't even read anything from the 20th century. Go and don't read ancient philosophy either. Read modernism. Start with Descartes. Go to like Spinoza, Leibniz, Hume. Read Kant. Read your fucking Kant. And then read some Hegel. And then read Marx. If you're not really interested in philosophy, you're more interested in political theory, radical theory, whatever, do not fucking read any French bullshit. Nothing from the 20th century. Read Marx. If you've read Marx, read like some, like Russian guys. Maybe from the first 2 or 3 decades of the 20th century is okay, but do not go to continental Europe. Stay in Russia. Do not read any continental philosophy. Exceptions can be made for Adorno, but you shouldn't read him because he's too difficult. Benjamin, same thing. Shouldn't really read him. Shouldn't be wasting your time with that. And Lukács. Again, all these 20th century guys, don't waste your time with if you're new. If you're an anarchist and you don't really want to read Marx, you're wrong. But go read like some 19th century anarchists. Read the Bread Book. Read Proudhon. Read Bakunin. Do not fucking read French shit. And if you absolutely must go into the 20th century, just stay away from France. You can read German shit. You can read British shit. It's very boring. You can read some... don't even read American stuff because they just follow the French. Just, for fuck's sake, don't read French philosophy. Don't read the Frankfurt School either. Marcuse, Horkheimer... and that other guy, Habermas, they're all a waste of time. They're just liberals and CIA agents. Do not read them. Read Marx. Stay in the 19th century or earlier. Like, if you're interested in philosophy, read modern philosophy. Starting with Descartes, read Spinoza, Hume. Spend a lot of time on Kant until you can tell me what apperception means and how it fits into the whole system of transcendental idealism in 3,000 words or less. Then you're forbidden from reading any 20th century French philosophy. That's all I have to say.